3 years ago, I was in a class of really good magicians. I learned cool tricks with my hands and even copied the lightning ones. I even won some money on a TV show once, but I was the second best. For 20 years, I had a job in Las Vegas on Tuesdays. I did magic at a small place and made okay money doing magic for bachelorette parties. But when I turned 56, I decided to stop because people don't really like watching old guys try to get out of locked barrels. It was for sure when I tripped over a bar during my levitation trick. So, I retired and got a different job selling RVs. It was tricky, but not with magic, just different tricks to sell things. One day, while talking about selling an RV, a skinny guy with messy light brown hair interrupted me. He was annoying, smoking a cigarette and talking on his phone. "Hey, you're that guy from the Blue Room, right?" he asked, taking a picture of me. "Oh, man, I got great news." "Talk soon," he said on the phone and quickly put it in his pocket. I've been recognized before, and usually, I'd do a quick magic trick with my cards, make them laugh, and they'd go away. So, I told the man who was looking at the fancy RV to hold on a second while I finished talking to another guy. The new guy nodded and kept staring at me from behind the sign near our shop. I finished selling the RV in just 35 minutes because the customer paid with cash. After that, the customer drove away in his new RV. When I turned around, the same guy was still waiting for me. I laughed and played with my white mustache. "Pick a card, young man," I said. But instead of choosing a card, he just stared at me really hard. "I have more tricks," I joked. The young man said, "He's perfect, to no one in particular." "It's almost lunchtime for me," I said, a bit annoyed. "Take my business card and come back if you want to buy an RV." I was getting tired, and my stomach growled. I started walking away, but he stopped me by putting his arm in front of me. "Do you like it here? I know a way you can make a lot of money, even more than selling RVs," he said. "I'm about to have lunch." "Maybe another day," I tried to brush him off. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Russell Carter, and I saw your magic act a few years ago. Where are you going for lunch?" "It's on me. Just give me 30 minutes of your time." I was too hungry to say no to a free lunch. If this guy wanted to spend money on a stranger, why not? Luckily, there was a 24-hour diner next to the RV dealership, so we went there. We took a booth in the front, and a waitress came over to take our orders. It was time to figure out what this oddball wanted. "You used to be a magician, Anderson." I was. "But now, I'm retired." "That's okay, but my boss is always looking for new talent. We work with some of the best showmen." I asked my boss, "And he likes your magic tricks. He remembers seeing you at the Blue Door. Your ghost act caught his eye. What luck finding you today?" "Look, your boss might be nice, and I bet he pays well, but I'm done with entertaining people." "Well, we're not in the entertainment business. We're paid to investigate paranormal stuff. The only difference is we use illusions to help people get out of certain contracts." I looked at the young man, confused. "I don't think I understand, Dan." "It's pretty simple. People hire us to deal with ghosts, mostly landlords." "I can see you're still confused. Let me explain from the start." I listened as he explained how it worked. "Here's the basic idea. When landlords couldn't get rid of squatters or non-paying tenants, they called these guys as a last resort. Most customers found them through word of mouth. Even with the usual 30-day evictions, tenants would linger or damage the homes out of revenge. Scaring them away was the best option, according to Dan. I tried not to show how amused I was at this crazy idea. Living in Vegas had taught me that nothing was too wild. "How do you do it? I mean, how do the tenants not know you're there?" I sipped my coffee, listening closely. We get keys from landlords and hide in parts of houses, sometimes setting up our stuff when they're at work. Sometimes, we just hide in basements or attics. When 3 a.m. comes, the witching hour, that's when our show begins. One time, we waited for hours in an attic of an old apartment building, rats running across our feet while a husband and wife slept below. I listened, and just as I was going to say thanks for lunch, he said something strange. We make a lot of money. We charge for each job, and our last one made us over 100 grand just for a small apartment building. The latest job is a big apartment building. The tenants need to leave so the property can be sold for a new hotel, but some won't go. Last time, we scared them good with our tricks. He chuckled, then stuffed a big bite of hash browns and gravy into his mouth. Isn't it dangerous? How so? I mean, you're making people mad. What if they get so scared they attack you? What if they don't believe in ghosts? I get your worries. It's not usually a problem. Russell grinned, tilting his head a bit. I find that hard to believe, young man. Let me show you a trick, he said, winking. I sat there and watched. He called the waitress over. She came, smiling, and he pulled out his hand. It was completely missing. Just a bloody stump was there instead. I knew it was an illusion, and even without the blood, it would have been creepy for sure. The lady had a pitcher of ice water and dropped it when she saw the fake missing hand. I stood up to help her, and guess what? There were cockroaches instead of ice cubes on the floor. Yuck! Russell gave her a handkerchief, and when she wiped her face, the roaches and the fake missing hand were gone. Now, he used both hands to help her pick up the ice. The lady looked really upset and confused. She said she wasn't feeling well and went to the back of the kitchen with another waitress helping her. I looked at Russell and asked, "How did you do that?" "Magic," he said with a smile. "Come on. Not all tricks should be shared." He stood up, tossed me his card, and left the diner. I felt confused this time. Later that evening, I sat in my room, thinking about what happened. The next day, dealing with a customer who couldn't decide if he wanted to buy an RV, I thought maybe I could do something else. After a few hours, I found myself back in the same diner, staring at my coffee. I took out Dan's card and called him. He quickly arranged a phone meeting with his boss, and I was set to meet him the next day. I had to impress Dan's boss to join their team. The meeting happened in an old pawn shop on the city's edge. I walked into the small building, and it smelled like too many cigarettes. It wasn't well lit. A lady with bleach blonde hair, around 40 years old, greeted me with a handshake. I noticed her long red nails and the outfit she had on, a bodysuit with palm trees and blue jeans. She told me to wait in the lobby, and Big Sam would join me soon. She chewed gum loudly, and I figured she was the receptionist. "You're older than I thought." "Thanks," I said, a bit confused. "No, honey, don't take it personally. Big Sammy usually recruits kids off the street, and most haven't even finished high school. It's nice to see someone who isn't a kid. He'll like that." "Why is that?" "Because the young ones don't stick around. They always disappear after payday." I stood there as she licked stamps and stuck them on envelopes. "You can sit," she said, pointing to a pink chair. I looked down, and there was an orange cat lounging in the chair. "Oh, that's Elvis. You can move him." I smiled and looked at him. The cat opened one of his eyes, emerald green, seeming to say, "Don't you even think about it." "Oh, Elvis. Get up. Go chase mice," she said, popping her gum loudly. She picked up the fat cat and put him in the back of the office. Then, she went back to her desk, licking stamps and loudly chewing gum. I took off my jacket and put it on the chair before sitting down. The chair was old, stained, and covered in lumps of cat hair. I took a big breath and played on my phone while I waited. It felt like forever, maybe 20 minutes, when the man they called Big Jammy finally came out. Jammy was really tan and had long black hair tied in a ponytail. He had a thick gold chain necklace with a cross hanging from it, and bits of sweat dripped down his forehead. His dress shirt was unbuttoned, and some curly black hair stuck out. Big Sammy looked like those old mafia guys you see in movies. He gave a bunch of papers to the receptionist and then looked at me. "Marty," he said to the blonde woman, "we got the great Anderson here." "Pleasure to meet you, sir. Come to my office." He shook my hand with a lot of energy, and I followed him. "This is a real pleasure. I used to watch you in the Blue Room a lot. Vegas has many tricks, but you being in that RV lot, Russell found you as one of the best. Maybe I should pinch myself." He laughed loudly. I smiled but wasn't exactly sure what to say. "Russell explained what we do here, right?" "Yes, though I'm not sure what I'll be doing." "No problem there. My boys will show you the ropes. Not that there are many you don't already know." "When do I start?" I asked. "Tonight. I'll make sure you get a cut when I get paid in full." "Does it take a long time to get paid usually?" "No, I can give you some money up front if needed, but you have to stick around no matter what. Big Jammy doesn't like getting double-crossed." Big Jammy talked about himself like he thought really highly of himself. So, this was the tricky business they were into. I wasn't exactly sure why I ended up here, but they promised a big paycheck. They were like magical loan sharks. I had my doubts, and from the serious look on Big Sam's face, I could tell he meant business. I wondered if some of those teenagers who disappeared had something to do with this. Did they leave, or did something else happen to them? I didn't want to think about it. This was the most interesting thing happening to me in a long time, and I missed doing magic shows. This strange plan was probably the closest I'd ever get to getting paid for magic tricks. I thought about it, and then Big Jammy reached into his drawer and pulled out a bunch of cash. He handed me some of it. "There's 5,000 there, just to keep you quiet about this in case you don't want to join our little group. If you do, they meet at midnight at this address." He wrote down an address and slid it across the table to me. I smiled at Big Sam, and he winked at me. "So, it's a deal?" "Yes," I said, not too thrilled about taking the big pile of cash in front of me. We shook hands, and that was our first meeting. I half expected someone to jump me after leaving because of the cash, but I made it to my car safely and $5,000 richer. I decided to meet these illusionists before going to the location. I felt like I owed that much to myself. Who knew? It might be fun, maybe. Exactly at midnight, I pulled up to an old warehouse. I thought there would be a small crowd of cars, but I didn't see anyone else. I turned on my brights to see if anyone else was around, and then there was a loud bang at my passenger side window, scaring me. When I looked over, I saw it was Dan. "Turn off the lights," he said. I did what he said and turned off the headlights. Russell jiggled the handle to my passenger door, and I caught the hint and unlocked it. He got in, sat down, and didn't say anything for a moment, just looking around. Then, he told me to drive around the corner of the lot and park my vehicle. We sat in silence for a few more moments, and then he talked to me. "Never park in front of the place we're checking. Never use headlights or make noise. Tonight, we're basically checking out the place. We need to figure out the schedules of the people living there so we know the best time to set up and start our operation. I think I'm starting to understand how this all works." "How long does it take to figure things out?" "On average, a couple of weeks, but this place should be empty. There are a few stubborn people who won't take a payout, so it's up to us to scare the living daylights out of them." He laughed really hard. Where is everyone else? Big Sammy said I'd meet some other guys. You will. After we finish our shifts in a week, we compare notes. Our shift is from midnight to 5 a.m., then the next guys show up, and so on. After a week, we meet with Big Jammy and decide when to go in and set up. It was kind of like a heist, but without stealing. I sat there, getting ready for the next part. I sat there with Dan, looking at the building until my eyes started getting heavy. He shook my arm, and I looked down at his hand. Need a little pick-me-up? He held out a small bag of cocaine, but I shook my head. What about Adderall? I laughed, pulling up my coffee. I'm just a caffeine guy. At my age, I might get a heart attack. Your call. He took 2 Adderalls and sat back, focused on the old building. I tried my best to stay awake. It felt like days passed instead of hours, and then the sun started coming up. 2 headlights met my car head-on. Russell was watching the building with a dazed look. I think we have company. Huh? He mumbled and then looked at me. Ahead. Oh yeah, that's John and Jet. We can go. I'll see you tonight, same time, same place. With that, he left my car and disappeared into the early dawn light. I drove home feeling confused about what I had just done for the last 6 hours. I wasn't sure if I had lost my marbles. They all made what we were doing seem normal. The next night was the same, and so was the one after. After a week of stakeouts, watching a few tenants still living in the building, Russell said it was time to put a plan into action. Originally, I was told Big Jammy would hold a meeting to decide when to go into the building and set up our equipment. But Russell seemed to have his own ideas. Russell called a meeting about a week and a half later and said Big Jammy gave the okay for us to go into the building. I felt a bit uneasy since I hadn't heard it from Big Jammy myself, but Russell seemed to be in charge from the start. Russell was Big Sam's right-hand man, and he found me and set up the meeting with Big Sam. I decided not to ask too many questions. We met in an old storage unit not far from town, surrounded by the desert. Inside, there were tons of props used in magic shows. I recognized all of them. There was a levitating table, lots of magic mirrors, fog machines, and many notebooks and blueprints, which I guessed were for the building layouts. Thanks for coming, guys, Russell said, pulling out a small bag of pills and popping 3 in his mouth. Then, he opened a beer and chugged it down. He took a deep breath and belched loudly. No one seemed to mind, but I found it pretty annoying. The other guys looked as shabby as Dan. He wore a black leather jacket with black boots and goggles on his head. Jet was a tall, skinny guy with a black Snoop Dogg t-shirt and tight black jeans. He wore saddle shoes like people did in the 80s, had red-rimmed glasses, and kept a green comb over his ear. He had leather gloves with the fingers hanging out. John was tall and wide, with long blonde hair shaved in a mohawk. He wore a long black raincoat and a white tank top. He, too, looked like a fashion misfit. All 3 of them together looked like a really bad steampunk band. I sat there in a short-sleeved dress shirt, polished brown dress shoes, and matching slacks. I felt like I was dressed too nicely. We haven't seen anyone there in 2 nights, John began. But the old bag lady is still there with her nephew. I think there are 2 others, but they're in a gang. It's going to be hard to keep track of the gang activity coming and going at night, Jet said, rubbing his chin in thought. We can go in later today. I think if we dress as fumigation workers, no one will pay attention to us. We can easily get in, Russell said, pacing. That's suspicious. 3 or 4 random workers all in fumigation masks? John asked. Like Ghostbusters, laughed Jet. Not funny, John said, rolling his eyes. Technically, we're fumigation workers, but for people, Jet said, fixing his glasses. He pulled out a deck of cards and made them dance on the table in front of him. I watched, trying to figure out how he moved them so fast. It wasn't the usual card trick. The cards flew from his hand to the table and back again. I shook my head, blinking, and then it hit me. Painters. It's not strange for painters to come in a group, I suggested, thinking it sounded as silly as their idea. That's awesome, said Dan, clapping his hands. The others smiled, nodding in agreement. Good job, old man, Jet said, patting me on the shoulder. Were they serious? It sounded like a half-baked idea to me. Russell grabbed a rolled-up blueprint from the floor and started planning where and how we'd set up our magic tricks. They gathered everything up, and I noticed they didn't bring any supplies, except for a medium-sized chest. What do you want me to bring? What kind of tricks should I do? I asked. Russell patted my shoulder. Everything we need is in this box. I was confused, but being new, I didn't question it. We all got into what Russell called the shad gin wagon. We put on some painter's shirts and baggy pants. We drove to the building and parked the shad gin wagon in the back. Russell put on his steampunk goggles, and they looked good even with his painter's uniform. He carried the blueprints under his arm, and John carried the chest. Jet had a small backpack, and he pointed to a ladder from the back of the van for me to carry. I looked at Jet, confused. It has to look real. What painter doesn't have a ladder? Russell laughed. I shrugged it off, grabbed the ladder, and followed the others to the building. We entered without anyone noticing, even though we knew some people still lived in the apartment building. Walking down the halls, I couldn't figure out why anyone would still choose to live there. The walls were cracked, and the ceilings leaked. Ants were everywhere, and a few times, I saw roaches running across the floor. Some parts had piles of garbage left by tenants who had already moved out. No wonder the owner wanted to sell the property and have it bulldozed. Russell found an entry to the attic area with a sign that said, "Hazardous Area." He placed the box on the floor, and the others settled around him, making themselves at home. Russell lit a cigarette, and the others sat around, doing their own thing. I stood, watching them, trying to figure out where I fit in. Finally, Russell looked up at me and smiled. "Anderson, we're going to be here for a while. Why don't you show us one of those cool card tricks?" The others chuckled as they watched me. I nodded, smiling, ready to show them my card on fire trick. Russell picked a card, and after shuffling it, I grabbed a lighter from Marcus, lighting the first card on fire, knowing it wasn't Dan's card. Burning it turned it into the card Russell had selected. I did the trick quickly. It was a simple bait and switch. As they laughed, I suddenly felt like an amateur. John took out a coin and then he put it behind his ear. Looking at Dan, he pulled the same coin from Dan's mouth. I chuckled because I had never seen the trick done so closely. We passed the time showing each other magic tricks, and as we got tired, Russell checked his watch. It was nearing 3 a.m., and we could hear people yelling and laughing just below us in the hallway. Russell looked around the room with an excited look on his face, like the Joker. "Showtime, fellas." John stood, almost happy, taking off his painter's uniform to reveal winged tattoos on his back that glowed in the dark. He put on a black shirt with a strange symbol in white on the front. Russell did his usual, a line of coke and a few pills to pump himself up. I had gotten used to Dan's drug use during the last couple of weeks. I anxiously watched them all change clothes as if they were going into battle. Russell handed me a dark blue sweatshirt, and I put it on. I guess the theme was to wear all dark and blend in with the night. I looked over at Russell and Jet, who also wore symbols on the front of their shirts. They were different from the one John had on, almost like sigils. I didn't understand what was going on, but I followed them as they grabbed the chest they brought with them. I watched as all three of them sneaked down from the ceiling in the dark hallway. There was barely any light because the landlord had removed most of the light bulbs to make people leave. I slowly followed them as they stood in the center of the hallway, forming a triangle. Russell was the first to move, opening the chest and pulling out a pair of 10-sided polygon dice. Russell rolled the dice, and that's when I realized what he was doing. A light appeared from them. The sides closest together moved in closer and connected to each other. After they moved, the light went out, and that's when I could see it. Down the hall were two tall shadows. Jet then pulled out a mirror from his backpack, placing it in the center where the dice were. The reflection of the dice in the mirror now faced the direction of the two shadows at the end of the long hall. The flickering lights were completely off, and the hall was pitch black. I heard hissing, and then I realized the shadows were slithering like snakes up the walls and into the vents of the apartment building. Screams came from inside the walls all around us. Terror echoed from every direction, and then I heard doors slamming and people running. I heard rattling above me in the ceiling where the vents were, and then I heard a gust of air as if someone turned on the central air. Then the sound stopped, and I heard nothing. The air was dry and cold after the screaming stopped. Then I heard something that sounded like someone running down the hallway toward us. It was so loud I thought whoever it was would run clear into me going at lightning speed. I saw a woman, older, wearing ragged clothing, and as I went to move out of the way, Russell stopped me. "She can't see or hear us." "She's gone," Russell trailed off, and then I saw the woman run through the wall. Then a man limping on a cane fell into what seemed like a void that opened in the middle of the floor. Others came, and they disappeared into the ceiling like phantoms. I stood bewildered. This presentation had to be the best illustration of magic I had ever seen. Was Russell doing this for my benefit? Was it a hologram? Then I felt it. A tremor surged through me. I bent over as its electric current kept me frozen in limbo. I couldn't move and my eyes, now closed, opened to see what the cause of my convulsions was. I saw that Dan, Jet, and John all were experiencing the same thing. Only the reason had me petrified to the bone. At the end of the hallway, those two slithering creatures were the cause. I had no idea how they were doing it, and I had no idea why we were subjecting ourselves to this. As I thought about this, I heard Russell speaking telepathically to me, "Let it finish, Anderson. Relax." It was as if you were getting high off the energy of the spirits, taking in their essence. The dice on the floor parted, and those shadows disappeared. A light at the end of the dark hallway flickered back on. I walked out of the building, confused and pale. I had no idea what happened to those people, but there was blood on the walls and the hallway's tile floors. I left in a hurried rush and planned never to look back, but I knew Russell would not let me go for whatever reason they needed me. Not to mention, my life was theirs now. If I tried to stop, they'd kill me, that much I knew. A few days later, I picked up a newspaper while I was out with Russell scouting our next set of victims. An article about 4 vagrants had been found drained of all of their blood in an old apartment building across town. I knew instantly that it was the building that Russell and the others had me accompany them to in the newspaper article. I was angry that I had been lied to, and their so-called magic wasn't what they said it was, and whatever magic they were using was evil. It was magic I had only heard about in fairy tales. I sat in the car with Russell looking out at the city as the people went to and fro. Russell received a phone call, and then he began to drive away. "Change of plans, Anderson," he said, speeding out of our parking spot and driving towards the hills. There was an old Tudor-style house with a perfect lawn. It had green grass that almost looked fake. It was so pristine. There was something about the place that looked as though the only occupants were ghosts. "What is this place?" "Sonata Manor." It was the home of one of the country's top composers. The only occupant left is the old composer's daughter. Should be easy enough to get rid of her, Russell chuckled to himself. I was not too fond of the sound of that. I knew what Russell had up his sleeve after the bloodbath at the other house. Is all this necessary for one person? Yes, but we will do things a bit differently. How so? I asked. It will be faster, Russell smirked. The cash will be the biggest yet, but the payoff won't be as fun though, Russell lamented. Whatever he meant by that. So that night, we sat in our cars and waited for all the lights to go out. Jet and John were ready too. We got out of our vehicles dressed like ninjas, all in black, so no one in the neighborhood would spot us. We climbed the trellis in the back of the house headed towards the attic. I managed as well as I could. Lord knew that I wasn't as limber as I once was at nearly 60 years of age, but I made do. When we were inside, all I could smell was old tobacco like my late grandmother used to smoke. She was half Native American from Kentucky and never let a day of hard work go by without her and her pipe. The other smell was much worse, like a funeral home. What is that smell? I asked. Who cares, old man? Let's just do what we came here to do. We did the usual setup, and then at the darkest hour of the night, Russell and the others took out their dice. Once on the floor, they began to stand in order. This time Russell asked me to stand by the attic door so that I could keep things in line. I felt my hands shake when the two dark figures appeared again. They were like ballet dancers the way they weaved in and out of our circle before descending into the cracks of the floor and down the walls as if made of light and shadow. We waited, and we waited. There were no screams of terror. Russell looked at me, worry in his green eyes. Something is wrong, he said, walking over to the two dice on the floor. What is it, man? Jet asked, bouncing around like he was feigning for a hit of some kind. They should be done by now, John said, looking around. John exploded then before our very eyes. We were too shocked to be frightened. Blood covered our faces, and his insides left splashes of blood all upon the ceiling. Russell looked at Jet and me and began to hold the dice one in each of his hands. Go back to where you were summoned. He held his eyes shut tight, but nothing came. Then in the doorway appeared a woman who couldn't have been more than 20 at the most. Are you looking for these, young necromancers? She asked, holding up two small shadows with some dark magic of her own. Russell pulled out a gun to my amazement and shot at her. Dan, what are you doing? Jet screamed. The bullets never hit the young woman. There was something about her eyes, something I couldn't place. She looked at me then. You aren't like them, but you must go and never come back. Anderson, no! Don't go, man. Don't listen to her. She is just a stupid, blind witch. Look at her eyes. Russell was nervous, and I could see him shaking. The young woman had some dark power, that was for sure. It was darker than Russell and all the rest combined. I am giving you seconds, old man, said the girl, and I did not stop to think. I went out the window to the attic the way I came. I looked back for only a second to my horror to see Russell and Jet's guts being ripped from their bodies. Blood splattering the walls, and my cheek as I went out of the attic window, in the same manner I had come. I went as fast as I could, not understanding fully what had happened but having a fairly good guess. Some time passed, after which I returned to my sales job selling RVs in the desert. I put my one mishap in an otherwise untarnished life away, hoping against hope that whatever I had participated in, I'd be forgiven at the end of days. I was writing up a sales slip for a customer when I got a tap on my shoulder. Oh, give me just a sec dash, I stopped in my tracks. It was the young woman from the manor. My hands dropped the pen I was now holding. You are Anderson, am I right? She asked cheerfully. Yeah, how can I help you? Let's not play games. You know why I'm here, don't you? I want to tell you I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't know what was going on when I got involved with those guys. Save it. I don't care how you came about those men. I do, however, think we could be perfect partners. In what? I asked her. She pulled out a box and opened it. This time, she had 5 dice inside it. I looked at her strangely at first, then she spoke. This was their first mistake. They didn't count on my being a witch. I eat necromancers and spirits for breakfast. I hope you don't mind. I added your 3 friends to their little collection. Time for them to work for us. What do you say? I was stunned and also alarmed. I am out of the haunted house business, I said to her as sincere as I could be. I don't want to make haunted houses, silly. I want you to help me collect the bad spirits from them. They taste divine, and they give you a bit of a buzz too. I thought back to Russell and when he seemed to get a buzz off those people dying. She just wanted to eat their souls and catch a buzz, and I wanted no part of it. Come on, Anderson, I'll make it worth your while. I'm a good young man. It isn't my thing. I hope you understand. The more bad souls that are eradicated, the better this pious world. Look, if you change your mind, here's my number. I think we could work together. When I looked down at the piece of paper she handed to me, I noticed that it had a moon and stars. Her name was Celine. I chuckled to myself because I was done with magic. I tossed the paper in the wastebasket, but when I looked up, she was gone entirely. There was no way she had gone from here so fast. That was several years ago now. The whole thing has given me pause to stop over the years. I wonder how Celine is sometimes doing. Whether she realizes it or not, she saved me that day. She let me escape. It's funny, every year I receive a box with a new dice in it. I put them away on a shelf and don't take them out. I know it's Celine sending them to me, and I understand why. She hopes I'll change my mind and join her. The other day, I got the latest one, this time with a note. Anderson. One witch to another, won't you reconsider? Do you think no one knew your secret? Everyone knew it. You think we don't know how you got so famous performing tricks that no one can really do? See. I smiled at the letter. So what if it was true? So what if my magic was real? I'd never tell because a true magician never reveals their secrets. How did you feel about Anderson's decision to join the group led by Big Sam? What do you think about his motivations? When Anderson witnessed the supernatural events in the old apartment building, did you find it scary or intriguing? Why? How did you react to the twist involving Celine and her offer to Anderson? Do you think Anderson made the right choice in refusing her? Are you ready for more exciting stories filled with magic and mystery? Join the fun by subscribing.